today on this IG Live, we're going to talk about rebranding. And before you freak out, a rebrand doesn't mean scrapping everything that you've already created in your business. A rebrand is perfect for when you want to lean into your strengths, and like if you're pivoting or if you felt like your current website or your current visuals for your business don't really capture and capture the moments or the evolution of your story. And that's why we are talking today with Deepti Sharma. I worked on her redesign for her website, and that's exactly what happened with her. If you don't know Deepti is a speaker, activist, and serial entrepreneur. So let's get started. Let me request her to join. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I feel like it's been forever since we were speaking to each other, because it's like we were always going back and forth in the text and in emails, that it's like now that we've launched, it feels like, oh, where have you been in my life?
I know. It's been a while, but I've been like slowly, trying to put content up and trying to launch stuff. So I'm excited to talk about it. When you suggested that we do this, I was like, oh, it's a great way, because I know a lot of friends that are always working on their personal brands as they're building, whatever they're working on, whether it's, they're entrepreneurs or, they have a side hustle. It's always great to have and maintain your personal brand, regardless of what you're doing in life.
Exactly. So before we jump into about your brand vision and how we rebranded and everything, tell everybody about you in case they don't know who you are.
Well, hi, I am Deepti Sharma, currently sitting in a hotel room. Yeah, I'm like, I don't even know where to begin. So, born and raised in Queens, New York, I've been, a really big proponent of like, how do I create impact in my community? And it really started when I was a kid in middle school. And, part of our curriculum was, to literally a part of our class, like our curriculum was service learning. So every week, once a week, we would go to a school and work with preschoolers that were disabled, and we would just work with them for an hour, right? And it was really like an awakening experience for me, that I think that's where my journey of like, how do I impact my community started, right? Because it was a part of my school curriculum, and that's where I kept thinking about like, well, what comes after this? Like, I'm done with middle school. It's been 4 years. Every week we were doing this. How do I continue to create impact? And so when I got to college, I thought that was going to be politics. And so I became a political science major, worked on a number of different campaigns. 2008, I, graduated college during a recession and thought, okay, well, I'm going to go to law school, get my, degree, and then go back into politics. And I was really doing it for knowledge, but somehow along the way, entrepreneurship kind of became a part of my journey. And it was then that I, decided, well, you can actually create impact by creating a company that provides for a community that's been overlooked. And so, yeah, that's how I started my first company, Food to Eat. Was studying for my LSATs, waiting online for a food truck, waited too long for for the food, and I, it really sparked that first idea of like, how do I create access to these food trucks and carts. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started 2 companies. My first one was Food to Eat. Second one I started with my husband, called Bicky. I'm currently the entrepreneur in residence at Barnard and Columbia, and always thinking about how to create impact, but also create opportunities for communities that are often left out of the conversations and aren't invited to the table. That's a little bit about me, a long-winded way of saying, like what the exact titles are. But, I always think about impact and where it came from in me, and how I decide to kind of put that forward. So, yeah.
I love that it was like built into your middle school curriculum, because like I feel like that's a novelty, I want to say, because it's like I didn't have that at my school, and I felt like it's always like volunteering or any of that was kind of like extracurricular or like kind of a nice to have, and like building that into the curriculum makes you, it really does open up your eyes to like what's out there, and how if you're introduce it to a young age, how you can continue that momentum, which you clearly did.
Yeah. And for me, it was really interesting because, here are kids that are living in the same neighborhood, similar socioeconomic backgrounds. I was watching, young kids They were much younger than me at the time. They were like 10 years younger than me, but they were having seizures, and I was being exposed to some really hard truths in the world, right in my community. Oftentimes people think, oh, poverty and hunger are not happening in America, but in fact they are, right? And
Mm-hmm.
until you're actually paying attention, you don't know. And so that was the really, integral part of this program, where you were seeing it happening right in your backyard, and you really, were like, well, I got to do something. Or at least it started to spark that in some people. I'm sure not everyone, thought that. Some people were just like, why are we doing this? But it takes time for that to develop and for you to really understand the why behind the what, so
Exactly.
yeah.
And you had that like at such a young age. And so now that we designed and redesigned your personal brand, like why was it like now that you wanted to do it? Because it's like you've had such a in-depth career. I think when I was like putting out like doing your portfolio, I think it was like maybe 12 years long of like events and writing and
Yeah.
speaking and things like that. So like what sparked that, oh, like I want to redesign, I want to spruce things up?
Yeah, I mean, so, I started my entrepreneurial journey. 2011 was when we launched the company,
Mm-hmm.
but I started building, a few years before that. And so every single time I was invited to speak, I was so grateful that somebody wanted to hear from me. I didn't think I had a voice. I didn't think I had something to say. I was just so focused on creating my company and my brand, and not my personal brand, right? So it was just focused on that. And I started to notice like other friends that were founders that were being invited to similar events. And, I started seeing them documenting, carrying around tripods and recording themselves. They didn't have big budgets or somebody following them. They just had to do and create content themselves. Now content creation is so different than it was back in 2011, 12, when I was starting the company. So it is quite interesting to see how much has changed. But, when I was being invited, I didn't realize that I had a personal voice, and that my personal story was so attached to the work that I was putting out there and the work that I was doing, and it was all connected, and that maybe that it was important to, kind of talk about it. So it took me a few years, a few friends that were, founder entrepreneurs. I've always surrounded myself with founders that were important to me, that helped me kind of along my journey as an entrepreneur. And it wasn't until some of them were like, hey, why don't you have your own personal page up? And I'm like, how do you do that? Like, and some, and like, I'm asking them, like, I don't know how to build websites, right? Like, I'm not an engineer, but I know that there are easy ways to do this. But I was acting like I didn't know, or, just probably wasn't thinking about it myself. And so some of them were like, just go on Squarespace and just like build a website, right? Like just document everything. And so I literally used one of my friend's templates, copied exactly what she did. And it's Renisha Bing from Her Agenda. She's been such an amazing, just like friend who's like always shared along the way. Like, wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna keep secrets to myself. And so yeah, I built a personal site by myself. It was literally just everything I had ever done, every speaking thing, but there was no story behind it.
Okay.
There was a bio, but there was nothing talking about my past, my present and my future, and like how everything is connected and what I really care about. And so, you know, when Fuji took a big hit in 2020, all these changes happened, and I was sitting last year and was like, I have done so many things in just 3 years, right? In just these like 2, 3 years, I've run for office, I've fed 500,000 New Yorkers, and none of that is like captured in a nice way in, on my website. And so that's when, we've known each other for a while, never worked together. I've always talked about the work that you've done. I'm like, yeah, I have a friend who designs really cool stuff. And, it's just like I've always admired your work. And so I was like, who can I work with that knows me, understands, my ethos and my energy, and is actually a branding expert, right? And so while I know how to create, branding, messaging, and marketing, it's really hard when you have to do it for yourself. And so that's when I decided to step outside of my comfort zone and say, hey, Jasmine, like, I'd like to hire you. I'm like, not asking you to do this as a friend. I need to hire you to help me really create this next stage of what my personal brand looks like.
Yeah, I love that. you went through all the journeys and all the steps into like creating your own personal brand. It's like, yes, you had your mentor who inspired you and you were able to like start there. And then it gets to a point where it's like, okay, I need to let go of the reins and like have outside help. Like you're a very self-sufficient person. So like, I know that it's like, ooh, like I know I can do it, but it's like when you don't have the time, when there's other things that could be prioritized, it's like, that's when you should lean out into your team and ask for help, and like makes things go a lot faster.
And also like invest in yourself, right? So much of the time we're like, oh, if I can do it myself, I can save this money.
Mm-hmm.
I know how, like sometimes it's good to get out of your own head, especially when creating a brand that has a deep personal connection. And to just like, and that's why people hire me too, right? Like I do a lot of the strategy work and people hire me to help them look at their brands from an outside perspective. And that's what I needed. But again, people forget like you yourself are a brand too. And so you're like, yeah, I know how to talk about myself. I can do this. And that's where your help was so nice. Like all the questions that you started asking me, I was like, oh, wow, I didn't even think about that for myself.
It's funny how we get so kind of closed-minded, because it's like we can do it for other people, but we can't actually do it for ourselves. So it's good to have that outside.
Or it takes forever.
Exactly. I feel like
it doesn't go anywhere.
I'm doing like my own personal brand roadmap, which is like what you get after we like sit down and do our brand strategy sessions together. And it like just takes all the notes, and just doing it for myself, I'm like, why am I not done with this already? Because it's like you keep prioritizing other things. And so what was it like creating your personal brand versus like the companies and the branding that you've done for your own companies? Like was it different? Was it the same? Like, because it's like now we're talking about you.
It was definitely very different, for sure, because every single time I'm creating or I've created a brand or helped others, I'm looking at, their customers. Who are they? Defining them. And I've never met them, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is all like speculation of who you think your potential customers will be. And if there's anyone watching, you all know building customer profiles and all that kind of stuff is a part of the process. And so having to do that for yourself, it was almost like therapeutic. And it was like a therapy session to some degree, because you were asking very personal questions, right? You were asking about what I thought about certain things, my views, and like things that I went through as a kid, and how all of those are connected to who I am as a person. So yeah, I felt like a little bit, like a therapy session where I was just kind of having to dig deeper, and you were like, yeah, sometimes people get uncomfortable, and if you don't feel like talking about this, that's okay. I'm just going to put these questions out there, and if you want to come back to them, that's fine. And so it was very different because of the way I had to work my brain and to digging deeper. And I've run for office in the past few years, and I had to do that then as well, right? Like everything about you is torn apart when you run for office, right? Like everyone thinks you're a terrible person at first, until you have to like build that trust and get, allow them to trust you and understand who you are, and all that kind of interesting stuff that you go through as a candidate. But this was kind of a similar process in that way, where I was like soul searching and like, wait, what makes me a good person, or what makes me? What makes me different? What makes me unique? Why would somebody want to work with me and hire me? And, when we even created that prospective client that would hire me, I thought that was funny, for as a speaker or as a strategy or a strategist who would come in and help them with their, branding, vision, and all that kind of stuff. I was like, why would they hire me? Right. And you're almost like, then you go through this imposter syndrome, and it was nice to have you help me break that down and just say like, yeah, look at all these things that you've done. Now we just need to package them in a way that people understand. Right. And people have always known me as one thing. And so it was allowing people to understand that I'm not just the founder of Food to Eat. I've started a second company, and I ran for office, and I fed New Yorkers, and I've pivoted, and I'm a child of immigrants, and that's part of my story. And so yeah, I think like all of those things were really important to think about and talk about. And so not only did I have to do that with you and, Maura, who's not with us, I had to do that with the copywriter that you had introduced me to. And that was a whole nother session of like, how do I get her to like put this into words? Because I remember saying like, does this make sense? Like, do you understand what I'm saying? And she's like, yeah, just keep talking. Don't stop.
I think that like it's true. It's like, just keep talking, just keep going through, because it's like when you're speaking to that expert that you're working with, whether it's a designer, a copywriter, a marketing specialist, like any of those people, they just kind of want to keep knowing your story. So
Yeah.
for you to just keep brain dumping basically, and if it usually it's like it doesn't make sense to you, but it's like as the other person receiving that information, you're like, oh no, like you can start seeing these connections and connecting all the dots, and it's like, no, it makes complete sense. And so with Maura, it was great because like after I did the brand strategy session with you, and then we were able to hand off that brand roadmap to her, and then she was able to take that, like envision who that dream client is of yours who's going to hire you. And then I think one thing she said, she was like, when she received it, she was like, oh, I didn't picture, like, I think we named her Janice. So she was like, oh, I didn't think Janice looked like this. Like she was cool and edgy and things like that. So it's like, it gives you that perspective to have that person in mind, and then being able to take her specialty and her expertise and then run with that too. So what was it like to have like a collaboration, a team to work with, versus doing it all yourself?
I mean, I absolutely loved it. I literally just recommend it, which is why, once we started putting content out there and sharing, I kept talking about how wonderful the experience was. And I think that a collaborative effort always goes just goes much further, right? Like when you're building a brand, it can't just be one person. You have to get the thoughts and perspectives of others. I always say to people building their own brands, do not create something without talking to the people that you're creating for, right? And getting different perspectives. And I kind of needed to do that. You both are people that would potentially hire me as well, right? For certain kinds of work. And so I felt like I was also talking to potential clients, and selling to, the right demographic. And so for me, I loved the collaborative effort. I love being able to get on calls with both of you and kind of hear your thoughts, hear your criticisms and feedback, and take that in and understand it. But yeah, I would never, again, no matter how much of an expert you are in the space, I think it's always good to build a personal brand with others to help you get that perspective that you're not seeing about yourself. Sometimes people are seeing things that you'll never be able to see, right? Which is why, again, we go to therapy. At least I do, right? And like, I need that perspective. I need some, there's so many things you already know, but you don't know how to get it out there. You don't know how to package it. And so having someone, be able to create the words, having someone be able to create the visuals, was really nice, and just like gave me something that wasn't cookie cutter, right? That wasn't like a template that I just pulled off of Squarespace and it looked like everybody else's website. This was something that was more connected to me as an individual. And so I think that your design work really showed that, right? We picked through and looked through some different work that you put together, and this felt connected, but also like allowed me to step outside of my comfort zone, right? So the look and feel of the website today is not something I would have done on my own. I remember you gave me one that I was like, this is exactly who I am. And then you gave me one that wasn't exactly who I am and had a little bit of flair. And I was like, I kind of want to step outside of that comfort zone. I want to kind of break away from what I've always been known as. I want a little bit of loud, but also a little bit of humility in the work that I'm putting out there. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed the experience and highly recommend it, especially with both of you.
I think the proud moment when I did show you those two look and feels was like, you were like, okay, this is what I'm used to and this is what I'm not. But then you were like, I think the actual like proud mama bear moment was like, oh, this actually could meet my ideal customer at where they're at. It's not scaring them away if they weren't ready to make such a big change. Like this kind of ease them into who I am, ease them into being able to make more of an impact in their community. And I was like, yes, like so excited because like you got to see that, you made that decision for yourself without me being like, oh, but like let's make sure we have your ideal client in mind. And yeah, like taking it, your website definitely does not feel out of the box cookie cutter, which I'm so excited for. And it's like we took parts of your, like there's so much behind your story that I didn't want to take away. So like, yes, we use like a simple sans serif font, or like your brand colors are black, white, and gray. Like that's because you have vivid imagery. You have these words that make an impact. And it's like, you don't want to distract or take away from any of that. So it's like, you have to have like kind of a more subdued background to amplify everything that you're saying, which was great. And then like, even the pattern that I designed for you, like I think my original inspiration was because it's like, oh, kind of like your voice, how it travels like with sound waves. And then as I was like, actually drawing it, I was like, oh, it also kind of reminds me of like a fingerprint, which then connects back to your you embracing your identity. So it's like everything has a reason, like a rhyme and a reason to it. And then being able to add white space, which is like kind of like not empty space, but just breathability around each section. Like there's a lot to take into your story and digest. You want to give your viewer and your client like that time to digest it all and see everything you brought to the table. So it's like, I feel like when it comes to visuals, people are like, oh, just like do what you do or make it pretty. And it's like, no, there's actual like reasons and data behind it.
Everything has, and I think that's what I really enjoyed, right? Was that you were able to kind of look inside my story beyond the surface, and were able to look at like how every part of my identity is woven into the work I do, right? And why I do it, right? It's not just what I do, but there's always a why and there's a reason, and everything is all connected. You know, being a woman, being a person who is of color, being someone who identifies, you know, being a child of immigrants, and like how that's impacted me, and you know, how closely. I mean, like I got a tattoo with the year that my dad came to this country. Because it hasn't made a huge impact on me, right? Like, and I think like weaving that into the visuals of the website was really, really important, while also remembering that it's a part of the story, and so putting it into the words. So I think like all of that was really awesome to see, and I could see it even without you explaining it. And I think like once people like start to kind of acknowledge the work and read the words and giving that white space. I remember at first I was like uncomfortable. I was like, why is there so much white space? Because I was always like so used to filling up the page with stuff. And so it was nice to have, you know, like something that was so different that I wasn't used to, and presenting it. Yeah. And like, you know, people will always say like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. Like, I've had people go out of their way to just be like, hey, I really like your website. Like, I'm not asking for opinions. I'm not reaching out to friends. I'm just having people reaching out and saying, like, I really love the new look and feel. And so I can see a different excitement than I have ever seen in the past with what my template from Squarespace was that I created on my own, versus like having worked with two professionals that are really great at their job. And, you know, also like I love working with women. I love the way that we kind of see each other in different ways. And, you know, Maura being a mother, and, you know, you being a mixed race, and like your background and your identity. I think that was really important for me to have someone that understood the different identities and labels, and like was able to actually like not be like just listening to me, right? They were like living the experiences to some extent. And you and I have like talked about it from the day we met, like, you know, being of mixed race, growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood for you, and like just talking to Maura and getting to know her, it was very different because she was new for me, but and for you as well, I know. So it was cool to like get to know people along the way, and then just say like, yeah, this kind of works. It has its own synergy.
I love that. It really has like it's like, yeah, it's not just hiring somebody to do the work for you. It's really connecting and learning about them, and it builds a stronger, like it makes everybody more excited and passionate about what the work we're doing and what we're putting out in the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's really important. I hope that, you know, this inspires other people to invest in themselves. You know, like a lot of times we're too afraid to say like, I need to spend X $1,000 on like creating my brand. Like, no, it's important. If the message you're creating is important, the way it looks, the way it gets out there is also important. If you look at every movement, just on a social or political level, everything is a campaign. Everything has colors and brands, and like, you know, we look at, you know, the Marriage Act and all of the work that has gone in, it was a lot of branding and messaging that was really important. It wasn't just people going out and protesting. Everything had a place. And so, you know, as the activist side of me, it's really important that we all think about it, right? That every program that, um, every movement thinks about how they're perceived and how they're like being viewed. So whether you're an entrepreneur, you're a speaker who's just talking about your story and your experiences, or you're an activist, I think it's really essential to think about how you invest in yourself, how you show up for yourself, and you know, tell that story in the right way.
I love that. So let's wrap everything up because I know that we're staying a little long. How can everybody connect with you or work with you? What's on the table right now for you and your authors?
Yeah, I mean, so the most important thing is I'd love to help anybody that's working on their own companies, help them strategize. I love, you know, like companies at the very entry level when everything is so exciting but confusing all at the same time. I'm really good. I'm really good perspective to bring in and to help you kind of build that strategy for the next 6 to 18 months. You can find me on my website, deeptisharma.com, Deepti on all social. And, you know, everyone that has worked with me on creating the website is on the website. If you go to the bottom, you can find Jasmine, you can find Maura, you can find Terica, who actually created the logo when I was running for office. And it was really important for me to acknowledge everyone that was a part of the village that created the website. And so, yeah, I mean, just, you know, I'm ready to speak, be on those stages, and tell my story, but also tell other people's stories. So yeah, there's like everything is on the website. So go there first.
Yay. Definitely follow Deepti. I'm telling you, she does amazing stuff, always putting herself out there, really encouraging confidence and really trying to make that impact. And as even if it feels like it's small, like make that impact. You got it. So thank you, Deepti. I appreciate you showing up today.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.